Hey everybody, welcome back to Back Lot Banter. Today, it's Dune time. And that's right, me, Mr. Sandworm, is here to talk with Tanner, Abram, and Tucker about Denis Villeneuve's newest sci-fi action blockbuster mega flick that came out yesterday.
That's right. We're here to talk about Dune. Thank you, Timo. Timo, where did Mr. Sandworm go?
Oh, he's right here, he's right here.
Sometimes the
Timo
Sandworms
must
will
have
just...
used a thumper to distract him.
Yes,
I did.
Right.
Oh, Dune reference in the Dune review.
We'll be hitting lots of Dune references in this Dune review because, as Mr. Sandworm rightly introduced to us, we will be talking about Dune. The biggest blockbuster of the year, maybe, possibly, who's to say?
But if
Most
people want to talk to us
advertised?
about Dune, where can they go?
They can go to the Discord, I believe.
The
Abram.
Discord, or maybe the comments.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe
Yeah.
the comments.
Which
Let us
are
know your
all
thoughts
below
on
this
Dune.
video.
Yeah, it's true. Like this video, subscribe to Back Lot Banter. You know the drill. Okay.
We're doing this intro a community style. You know,
Yep.
it takes a village to raise an intro, so we're just
Uh-huh.
all chipping in, doing our part.
Maybe a planet to do an intro, in fact. A planet such as Arrakis.
Dune!
Dune! All right, we're all Duners here today, and today
Yeah.
we will be talking about Dune.
Yep.
Timo Nelson, I would love for you to start
Okay.
with your thoughts on Dune, because you're the biggest Duner of us all.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I am the only one, right, who's read the book.
I have not yet finished the book. I have,
Okay.
I have a few hours left.
You're
Okay.
doing the audiobook. You're a fucking
I'm doing the audiobook.
phony and a coward.
That is
I'm
not
sorry.
called reading.
I'm just-
No. Good for you. Good
Wow.
for you for experiencing the Frank Herbert's novel in whichever way you choose to. Dune. I love the sci-fi property Dune, and I was quite happy with how Villeneuve's adaptation came out. I got to see it a little while ago, so I've had some distance about it. The rest of you guys saw it yesterday, and I quite like it. I think that adaptation-wise, it succeeds very well in adapting what is a stupidly difficult book to adapt. Dune as a book is like really not film-friendly, and yet I think Denis Villeneuve has done a good job. I have critiques here and there. There's some points of issue with the film, but by and large, I'm really happy with it. And please, dear God, Warner Brothers, please make the second one, because I think the second one will tie everything together and make the whole series just really, really awesome and a sight to behold of filmmaking, perhaps even. Those are my thoughts. In short, I can go on and on and on and talk about all kinds of different stuff. I've also seen the David Lynch version. I watched that before, like the night before I watched Dune.
Oh, wow.
And I have
Back-to-back.
Yeah, back to back. I have some thoughts about that, and I think we'll discuss Lynch's version versus Villeneuve's version at least a little bit, even though we should probably just focus on Villeneuve's version because that was the most recent thing that came out. But I'm interested in hearing what you guys think. I kind of know what Abram and Tucker think, although I haven't heard any specifics, but I have no idea what Tanner thinks about this film. So maybe you should start, Monsieur?
I'll take it. I'll take the reins here a second. I'll take the reins of this sandworm, if I will.
Not quite yet.
Desert
Pardon.
power.
Desert power, indeed. I think Denis Villeneuve's Dune is good. As Timo said, I think that Dune as a novel, especially after watching this one, is largely unadaptable, and in a pure sense, there is no way to adapt a one-to-one of that book, at least in any recognizable sense. I think Denis Villeneuve does a good job of taking the story, the broad story beats, and putting it in the film, making it packageable and understandable and digestible for a general audience. I do have some issues with some larger aspects of the film as a whole, but by and large, again, I do think it is good. And we'll get into my critiques and what I do like about it more specifically. But I was positive on it, if not underwhelmed.
Okay. Who wants to go next, Tucker or Abram?
Tucker, would you like to do the honors?
I'll stick my fucking neck out here.
Sure.
All right. Here's my neck inserted into the guillotine, ready for
Not the guillotine,
removal.
the mouth of the sandworm.
The mouth of the sandworm, a guillotine style.
It's gonna eat you.
We got the wonderful chance to see David Lynch's Dune very close to the front of a screen in a large Alamo Draft House, like one night super spectacular for Lynch's Dune a couple weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I went to that movie knowing absolutely nothing about Dune in general, other than Zendaya was Chani and fucking Paul Timothy Chalamet, whatever. There was a bunch of Dune memes, and of course I knew there were worms. That was exclusively my knowledge of Dune. And watching that film and then subsequently, and I think naturally so, comparing it to this and seeing where the two stack up in terms of their strengths and weaknesses, I left the 2.5-hour runtime of good old Denny's version of Dune pretty severely underwhelmed. I think that what this film does is really focused in where it does its best, which is in scope, which is in impact of just giant fucking things making really deep bass and noises that shake your fucking seat. But when you really tune it down to the small aspects of the characters and the story and the world building, I don't think this movie earns its runtime. I think it's very vapid and empty, and I guess you could say intentionally so, but with a world so rich and complicated as Dune, I really expected a lot more out of this with its half content. It's not the full story. It's only part 1 of book 1, and its extended runtime being almost 2.5 hours.
Okay. Abram, what did you think? Because I think you are the hottest on this film, if I am understanding correctly.
No, I certainly am. This is the best movie. I don't want to say best. I'll say my favorite movie I've seen since Blade Runner 2049, which might suggest a little bit of a pattern there. Dune is the film that, for me, cemented Denis Villeneuve as my favorite director. And this, upon a first viewing, I think is going to become one of my favorite movies of all time. It's similar to how I felt watching Akira recently, and knowing right away, okay, yeah, that's done. Fucking put it in the books. Where I'm going to be rewatching this a couple times, and it's going to quickly shoot up the ranks. And I want to talk about why when we get into the more filmic elements in the narrative and everything. But I was just really stunned by Dune. I am seeing it again tomorrow night with a bunch of friends. We're doing a big screening in one of the auditoriums here on campus, and I think I'm going to watch it a second time tonight. So tomorrow will be my third viewing. I just love it, and I want to talk about why. Even though I think that you can pretty clearly point to where the film, on a more objective level, I wouldn't say a technical level, because I think the film is fucking beautifully assembled, but on a story and character level, where it falls short. But for what I look for when I'm watching film, it had everything for me.
Boom, there you go. So I think I want to start off the discussion thinking about world building, because Dune as a world building property is really interesting. And just when we lay out what is going on in the Dune universe, there's a lot to think about. The Duneverse, there's a lot to think about. And I kind of want to start with my initial reaction to watching Lynch's Dune and then comparing it to Villeneuve's Dune. I feel like Lynch's Dune has far too much information too soon that you don't need, that is a bit superfluous to the story, and adds confusion. Whereas Villeneuve's Dune understands just what you need. There's only so much you can really pack into a movie and keep it understandable for broad audiences. And that's where he figures out how to draw this line in the sand, so to speak, and and figure out exactly, what do we need to tell?
Is that a sand reference?
Maybe there might be some more. Do we really need to talk about the guild a lot here at the beginning? Do we need to talk about the structure of the empire and have this opening monologue by Princess Irulan and
yes.
And so what actually happened?
Book Tanner comes in. I know exactly how they're pronounced.
Exactly.
As soon as I watched Lynch's Dune, I immediately told all my friends who I was going to go see it with, go see Villeneuve's version with, I said, don't watch Lynch's Dune, because I actually think there's just straight up spoilers for the end of this film and for the next one. And so,
I mean, that would make sense.
Yes.
It's the story of Dune.
It's the whole story.
Yes.
But beyond that, not even just in the latter half of Lynch's version, I think in the beginning, I don't even think that people who want to experience Villeneuve's Dune to the fullest extent should really dive that deep into Lynch's version, because of the way it handles a lot of the story beats. I think Villeneuve's version excels in figuring out exactly what you need to tell, what you need to talk about the world, and where you don't need to talk about the world, so that there is elements of mystery and suspense. Because to me, that's removed a lot in Lynch's version. We know too much about what is going on. And so I was satisfied when I saw Villeneuve's version. I'm like, I know what's happening because I know the whole story, but I don't know it in the story world of the film. And I'm happy to see how these things that I know are going to come about play out later. And I think it works pretty well as a result of that. But I'm curious because Tucker, you saw Lynch's version first. You did
Abram's
the thing.
nodding his head and opening his mouth a little bit, so I want to actually let him talk.
Abram, talk.
I actually wanted to follow directly on that point because I had not read the book. I had not seen Lynch's Dune. The drive for me to see this film was Denis Villeneuve himself. So I was basically coming into it with a clean slate. And so to your point about, Timo, you going into this movie understanding all of this stuff and being presented with a sparse reading of it, right? I was coming in understanding nothing and being given that sparse reading.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm not sure it's a matter of suspense. I'm not sure if it's a matter of deliberately picking out what to show, what not to show, because I think a lot of this movie is very unclear to somebody who is not familiar with the source material. For me, there is a lot of terminology and a lot of characters and hierarchies and ideas that are not communicated to the viewer. And for me, that was very successful. But I think that it's a barrier to entry for sure. Because if you want what is going to be a very traditional narrative in which you're going to understand what Arrakis is in context of other planets, who these houses are, their interplays, their religions, their customs, you're not going to get that out of this movie. And so I was seeing some of my friends in my Twitter timeline be like, this movie was fucking boring. I didn't understand what's going on. Characters didn't do anything. Nothing happened. And I think to an extent that's true. And I think if you come in without a knowledge of Dune prior, that might be your takeaway. But for me, I found that lack of information really empowering. I found Dune is about the experience of the vistas and the sound and the curiosity. I think what we forget a lot of sometimes, at least from my perspective, with science fiction, with fantasy, is that sometimes it's the curiosity that's most effective. And curiosity is what got me interested in Star Wars, not understanding who somebody was, what they were doing, what the function of something was. And Dune is the first time for me that's been recaptured in a long time. I don't understand what Paul is. I don't really understand what House Harkins is. I don't really understand why we're on Arrakis. But what I want to do is understand that. I want to be immersed in the world. I want to rewatch this and get more out of it. I want to watch that second film. I want to read the book. And that's, for me, why Dune is so effective.
Here's just a little tidbit I'll throw in. I think it's all there in the first film. I think all of that stuff is in there. It's just deep. It's buried within a lot of the stuff. And I think it's not in dialogue.
Under some sand, if you will.
That's why I want to rewatch it.
Sand references.
Yeah, I think you have the right idea there in wanting to do that. And me knowing what's going on and trying to like say, okay, I know the backdrop of what's here, but I'm going to remove myself from that knowledge and just experience what the film is telling me. Through the filmmaking of it, I think there's a lot more communicated than is just in the dialogue or in like the literal story beats. I think there's a lot of really clever filmmaking choices to communicate some of those unadaptable things that maybe we can get into, but they're rather specific. And there may be spoilers for the next movie. I don't really know how much like plot I could talk about because who knows like if I'm going to be able to stop myself before I get into like, oh, and this is what happens later on in the book or whatever. So maybe not. But
the host Sandworm is going to have to start eating you if you're going to give me spoilers.
Well, sidestepping around landmines of spoilers. I should say that we'll probably spoil this film. We did say that up top. We'll spoil this film itself, but sidestepping around stuff that happens in the book that will most likely happen in the next movie, because that's kind of my issue. Is that a lot of like maybe B-tier characters are very underplayed in this version of Dune, who sort of come to have a more important role in some like subplots of the second part, which will be Dune Part 2 in like 2025 or whatever. But like characters like Thufir Hawat and Dr. Liet Kynes get very little play in this, and they sort of have an important role in the the culmination of this story and the characters coming back together. But yeah, the thing about, like the why we're on Arrakis, who is Paul Atreides, stuff like that. Maybe it is tangible on a rewatch, and I will probably rewatch this with my girlfriend who wasn't able to go with us last night. Uh, Maybe it's there, but right now I just don't think so. At least not to the extent that I want it to be. To me, when I hit play on that audiobook for Dune, 21 hours long, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna settle into this. And what I love most about Frank Herbert's Dune is the amount of detail and character dynamics and interwoven relationships that exist within it. The underhanded politics, the ulterior motives, the backstabbing, the multiple people talking to A through D list characters and setting up multiple different things with every single one of them. And that is not present in this one at all. And I understand that it's necessary to make it more digestible in a 2.5 hour format, even though that is long. It is necessary to cut some of that out for an audience. But that is just the most interesting part of the Dune story to me, and it's just not present here. Which is why I say I can respect what this movie does, but I'm just not as crazy about it as I am about the original text.
Yeah, it's interesting. I come from I guess alongside Tanner, but only kind of tangentially, a really interesting and unique place of my experience with Dune, which is being introduced to this world through the holy shit mind melding experience of watching David Lynch's Dune on a big ass fucking screen in front of me, dream sequences and colorful crap thrown every which way, and I'm just have to pick up what I can and try to scramble through that film. And what I found coming out the other side of that is that I was fascinated by this world because they gave me so much to connect to, even if it didn't connect immediately on my first viewing, that I was intrigued, kind of opposite of Abram, to watch this movie, to read the books, to learn more about the world, because I wanted to be able to make those connections, because I felt like there was so much there to dig into. The problem that I have with the new Dune, with Noon, if you will, is that it seems to steer away from what I picked up from Lynch's Dune as the most important elements of Dune's story, which is that political background and the world building. For this film, they opted to go for a very sparse telling of anything politic related. I mean, you see the Baron 4 times, maybe no viewing of the Emperor, not really any explanation of who the armies are or why these politics and the history of spice and Arrakis are important. And I just felt like with again, as I said earlier, the condensed or the lengthened runtime, as well as only this being only part one of the larger story, I expected for them to be able to really dig into those things that make this world interesting. And instead, it was mostly just surface level. He's the Duke. This is his helper. There is a war going on, and it felt really vapid to me. And I was just underwhelmed because I wanted to learn so much more about this, and the fact that they didn't show it just felt like a missed opportunity. And much like it didn't earn its runtime. A lot of that extra runtime is establishing shots, is slow-mo, is empty sequences with not a lot going on, which of course contributes to the tone, but in a world where there's so much detail that you can be digging into, the fact that they avoided that, I think, was a huge missed opportunity.
I think it comes to an interesting place of timing and pacing within the book structure, because the story of Dune takes place on Dune, on Arrakis. And a lot of that setup doesn't take place on Dune. And so you're in a hard place when you have to when you're building this movie of the epic sand desert planet, and then all of your setup needs to take place elsewhere, and you're trying to figure out a way to get your characters there to the planet, to where the action happens, where that big giant battle in the middle of the film happens in your kind of rise and fall narrative. And so I see where you're coming from in wanting to learn more about that. And I don't know how they would have fit any of that in the film at all. It doesn't seem like there's any place for it, because as soon as you get to Dune, it's all about Paul, and it's all about what the planet really means and what are the Fremen up to. And you're into this in totally different sphere. I don't think Dune is about the politics after you leave Caladan. I think once you leave Caladan, it's about what is happening, boots on the ground on Arrakis. And so,
sure,
like, how do you reconcile that? I don't know. Is it even possible? I don't know. It has to deal with the nature of the original source work, which is tricky, really tricky stuff to deal with.
the original book is split into 3 parts, which makes it much more easy, but doesn't really exactly track to the 3-act structure of like a film.
No.
But yeah, that's all I have to say. Abram, go ahead.
This is for me. This conversation speaks to a larger conversation that moves beyond Dune, just into the realm of like adaptation studies in general, right? Because I took a whole class on this last semester, and I hate being the college one. I hate putting on these fucking glasses.
Guys, I took a class on it.
We all
boy,
do.
here
We've
we
all
go.
done that, Abram. Don't feel bad.
We've all taken classes, Abram.
But the entire conceit of the class is that we're going to read a text, and then we're going to watch its adaptation, and we're going to discuss that process of translation. And what I came to recognize is that, believe it or not, what you can write in 500 pages, you cannot convey in 2.5 hours. So what I came to appreciate was an adaptation that provided a cinematic artistic experience that stood in conversation with the text. And what I think is effective about this is that's what it does. We're in a landscape where basically all of the media we cover on this channel is transmedia, right?
Yeah.
You got the comics into the books, into the video games, into the whatever. I don't think that there is a problem with Dune, Villeneuve's Dune, standing next to the book and the full Dune experience coming from the sum of those parts. I think what was effective to me about this movie is that it is sparse, it is barren. Perhaps it's not a great adaptation, but it's a very interesting science fiction movie. For me, it was the feel of the movie. It is the fact that it is very quiet. It's a very, very quiet movie. It spends a lot of time on... And then it gets very loud sometimes.
In all legitimacy, this was one of the loudest, most fucking butt-shaking movies I've ever seen in my entire life. The score and the sound design is so fucking heavy. And I mean this in a good way. I think the sound design is awesome in this movie. But every like note hit and movement of a vehicle or worm going anywhere is my fucking ass just and so I don't necessarily recognize this film as quiet because it leans so heavily into its impact being through that heavy sound design and sense of scale, and you seeing a shot of something gigantic and for honestly no reason it being accompanied with a fucking thing. It's like, well, that's not the sound it's actually making. But
yeah, but I think I see where you're coming from, but I don't think quietness is necessarily simply auditory. I think the emptiness of a shot, the sparseness of a sequence, the fact that there are moments of, on a sonic level, genuine silence broken by a sound. The loudness of Dune is, I think, as deliberate as the emptiness of a frame or as quiet of any particular sequence. And that sort of scale and that sort of play with experience and feel, I don't think is possible when you're trying to bring 500 pages of political interplay between characters into this movie. I think for me, I don't feel like by watching the film I've superseded the need to read the book. I feel like I can enjoy the works in conversation, which is a different approach to adaptation, but I think that one that's more successful because now we've got the artistic piece of work that is Frank Herbert's Dune and the artistic piece of work that is Denis Villeneuve's Dune, and both offer contrasting experiences.
Yeah. I think, I'd like to talk more about like specific elements of this film. We've done a lot of like high level, what we think about it from the top down. But you bring up a good point and a good segue into that is that obviously Dune being a book, whether you read it or listen to it like an absolute Chad like I am, you
listen to Dune on an audiobook? Yes.
Yes. You do miss that visual aspect, which Denis is a master of. He's a master of creating that visual and auditory scale from a sound engineering standpoint. He knows how to put together a team on a film that can do those sort of things. I said I would get into specifics, and I'm going to live to my word. Like the thing of that giant circular ship orbiting Arrakis, and then the tiny ship,
the Highline cruiser
that's traveling
the
through
Highliner,
it.
I think is what it's. Yeah. I know what you're talking about. It's awesome.
And then that lands on Arrakis, and that's like thousands of feet tall. And then the sandworms are a great thing. The sandstorm that Paul and Jessica have to fly through. All of it, all these elements, these set pieces, they all have that grand sense of scale that is due to the cinematography and the sound design and the direction.
Yes,
yeah, this 100%. It's a spectacular film. There is a lot of spectacle and a lot of opportunities just to sit back and kind of be in awe of what you're seeing on screen. And we're talking. I mean, this is a blockbuster pretty much. It's this Villeneuve brand of like thinking blockbuster, but it's still designed for larger audiences, for people who are used to seeing all kinds of action movies and that kind of stuff. And so when I'm watching it, I'm thinking about it from that perspective, and then also just allowing myself the pleasure of watching some really badass spaceship, get blown up on screen. That's just kind of fun. I just, an enjoyable in the moment to moment of those huge set pieces with all of that spectacle.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. I think when this movie is firing on its best, and why I still do think it is a good movie at the end of the day, even though the overall experience was underwhelming for me, is because of those visual elements, the tone that it sets up, especially when it's playing with scale. That description that Tanner was giving about the big thing and then the small thing, and the small thing also being big, and the planets being fucking ridiculous, and the cities and the battles and the scope of the explosions gazillions of stories tall. It is a impactful cinematic experience on a level that few movies reach. And Villeneuve is phenomenal at that. There were some shots in this of a spaceship towering over people, and I'm like, hey Tanner, can you tell that this is the guy who made Blade Runner 2049?
It was the shot of Baron Harkonnen's palace that's like a brutalist style pyramid, and Tucker shares me is like, can you believe this is the guy who made Blade Runner 2049? Because I think they just lifted that design straight from the movie and pasted it into this.
Baron Harkonnen lives in Tyrell headquarters, basically.
Exactly.
But I do think it's important that he has his style. Like, I can tell this is a guy who made Arrival and Blade Runner. Like, 100% he has his style, and I really, really respect that. And all of that visual elements, and the CGI is great 95% of the time, but all of that works really, really well. I think it's just the balance that it has of those scale elements not actually being the focus of the film. They're not relatively few and far between, but compared to the amount of screen time of characters talking to one another and boots on the ground action, as Timo was saying, that takes a back seat. And I think it's important for the experience. But when I feel that the core focus of the film, which is those character interactions, are pretty weak, as we'll get into each of the performances and the actual characterization of each character, it does feel like what the movie's best at, it's not focusing on. And when it does focus on, is a little bit underserved. And I feel like it's a balance that didn't necessarily work in the film's favor.
I think for me, this is a film of visuals. It's a film that tells its storytelling without its dialogue, which seems to be at odds with, as you guys are describing, the texture of Herbert's work. But I think that what speaks volumes in equal to the large scales, the small scale, what you glean from seeing a close-up of Paul into a close-up of the desert as he's going into a vision, and then the blood on Zendaya's hand, this striking red blood in this orange tinted frame. I think that's how it's communicating its information to you. And as a viewer, that piques my curiosity. That compels me in a way where I have to read and project the story. And that is very subjective, but I find that to be a very engaging way to force me to be an active viewer in my experience. And so when we're cutting back to the ceremonial knives and we're getting these visual motifs of characters.
I cut back to that fucking sword on the ground like 30 times in this movie.
That's the Chris knife is quite important. That's why they cut back to it a lot. It matters.
And that's how they're telling their story. And for me, that is effective. And it goes back to why I think you can read the book and watch the film and get a fuller experience, because it is not just about how big everything is. Sometimes it's about how small everything is, or how often we return to an idea, and the ways that we can get inside Paul's head with just images, or the ways that we learn about the voice, like when the High Mother, whatever, uses a voice on Paul, and the camera just cuts really quickly. It's a movie about slow movement, and then a cut, and he's on his knees in front of her. Sequences like this utilize what only film can do to convey narrative and thematic information that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
I think that's a really important point, Abram, in that in both the spectacle, I made another review for the TV show I work on, and I made the point of saying, like, watching those...
Plug.
Yeah, I don't know. You can watch it.
I'll put it in the description if
I want to watch it. I haven't seen it. I'd like to.
Throw it in the... It's where the sandworm sock puppet comes from. It's funny. It's short. But the idea that watching a spectacle and getting that auditory visual experience is just so much more fulfilling than reading it on the page. Even when on the page you can get all this like lore info and whatnot. You're talking about the Chris knife earlier, and I feel like this. I called it in an early draft of that review. We called it non-diegetic editing, which we cut because how do you
That's such a next level gigabrain fucking film school term.
exactly.
how do you throw that in?
It's so gigabrain is not even a real term.
No, I think I can make it up and call it a real term right now. Non-diegetic editing, where you're cutting in elements that aren't really in the story world. You're cutting in. It's maybe more of a
aesthetic editing is real.
It's not the editing, it's the shot placement.
Yeah, the bringing in elements that are not seen in the scene to either remind you or tell you extra information, or to in a Eisensteinian method connect two visual ideas together without using any dialogue. I'm like way into like Eisenstein and Pudovkin and these Soviet filmmakers right now and their techniques. And so I'm constantly thinking about it. But I think that it plays in this film and how Villeneuve chooses to show you things when you're cutting. When Paul is having a vision, you're seeing the vision, but you're kind of like not. It's being augmented and meddled with the real world, and so it's less explicit in what is like really going on, and therefore it's more ethereal and less like, oh, I'm having a waking dream, this is really freaky, which is kind of how I viewed what happens in Lynch's version. In Villeneuve's version, it's handled with a little bit defter touch on how to show that stuff. Of course, I have a difficult time separating like what I know in the book and in the movie. And so like I see something and I'm like, of course it's referencing this thing that's going to happen later. And who knows? When the second movie comes out, I think it's really all going to come together and make a lot of sense, which is my final thought. Tucker.
If when the second movie comes out.
No, I'll just kind of. I had an idea. I'm gonna continue something I was sort of thinking of earlier, which is my experience learning the story of Dune from Lynch's Dune, and that being very fast paced and very visually, what the fuck is going on? And it's quite Lynchian, if you can imagine. But one thing that I found interesting about this in its slowness and its openness is that, and you can rebut this as much as you need to with your big brain Dune book knowledge, but I found Lynch's Dune and Villeneuve's Dune from a story perspective to be surprisingly similar. I had heard so much about Lynch's Dune that was just like, nothing in here makes any sense. But I was watching this film and be like, oh, I know what's going to happen next because I saw Lynch's Dune, and this is a sequence where this happens, and this is a sequence where this happens. But because I was familiar that I was just kind of waiting around. I'm like, yeah, when's the thing gonna happen? I can see that it's being set up, but the setup's not that interesting, and I know what's coming is interesting. So it feels like there was a lot of downtime in this film where I was just like sitting in my seat, scratching my head, like, let's get to the thing that's gonna happen, because the added runtime might have contributed to the tone, but I don't think it increased my engagement with the story because a lot of that setup time did feel rather vapid.
Yeah, I just throw in, Tucker, I actually agree that Lynch's Dune, like plot point by plot point wise, is fairly similar. Villeneuve's Dune gets to add in a lot more.
Yes, well, of course.
But yeah, I do think they are similar in that. I think it's the context of what's happening in the scene and what you've seen beforehand, and that causes the difference between the two of them.
I think for me, Tucker, I like the runtime. I think it's a pacing issue, not a runtime issue for me.
Sure.
And I was watching this at home.
Yes, it makes sense.
And I'm a bumbling fool, and without fail, I watch my movies through my PS5 because I get the highest quality out of that. But without fucking fail, I hit the goddamn thumbstick and it starts rewinding on me every time I watch a movie. And so that's how I usually find out how far into a movie I am, and that was no different with Dune. And when we meet Zendaya, the movie had like half an hour left, and that's when I bumped the thumbstick and figured out, oh my god.
And a good portion of that is credits.
Oh my god, we got like 25 minutes left in the movie, and not a whole lot has happened, frankly. And so I think I wish we lived in a world where he could have just made a fucking 4-hour movie, like a Godfather Part 2 length epic, and just put that in theaters. He would never be able to. But the fact that I think perhaps the most commercial and frustrating part of this movie is the way that it says part 1 as it begins and closes where where another scene should begin. And
Yeah.
I feel
When
conflicted
Zendaya
about
says, "This is just the beginning."
I feel conflicted
God
about that
damn,
line.
that's so fucking commercialized and like,
Well,
get your fucking set tickets ready in 5 years.
The thing about it is it's no different than what Harry Potter did. It's no different than what Marvel did. It's the exact same thing that we get hyped about otherwise. I just, for me, it's a problem. I don't like how Deathly Hallows Part 1 broke. I don't like how Infinity War broke, and I think in the case of Deathly Hallows 1, Infinity War, and Dune Part 1, they all tell compelling stories. I just wish they could have told me the whole story.
I think it's interesting that the marketing of this film in no way indicates that this is only part 1 of the story. You have to be in the know of Dune as a book, as a franchise, and then the production of this film to know that this is not the full story. It's hilarious when Dune trailer, yeah, okay, we've been seeing these for 2 years, and you sit down in a theater, and one of the first things you see on the screen is Dune, part 1. It's like, oh yeah, yes, I knew that, but you made that. There was no reason that was clear through the marketing of this film, which is very strange.
Yeah, unclear what Warner's game here is, given that they. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was Warner involved with Blade Runner 2049, Abram? Do you know if this?
Yes.
If they
produced 2049.
So Warner funded Villeneuve's most previous movie, which cost $300 million and barely made that back up, including international box office.
It was a flop.
Yeah. So this film cost half as much. It only cost $150 million. In the terms of big budget Hollywood films, that's like not a huge amount. And so Warner has set itself a lower bar of box office returns in order to say, okay, we can make the next one. But it does make me think, I don't want to accuse Warner of shooting this film in the foot, but it could be the case of, because they haven't committed to the second one, which is the most insane and like angering thing about me. Because like Abram, I think it is. I really like where the ending is placed story-wise, knowing what's going to happen next, thinking about how do I split this into 2 parts. I think it's the only spot you could have done it. And
I think,
so I choose to be hyped with a little bit of trepidation, knowing that it's not a guarantee, which really makes me angry. I really want there to be a guarantee on the second film, because I do truly believe that everything will tie together. And if you're going to be crazy, watching them back to back might just be mind-blowingly good.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of the problem, and it just leads to a macro discussion about the fucking weirdness about this movie external to it. Because I unfortunately, I would be surprised if this movie turns any kind of significant profit. Denis Villeneuve does not make particularly profitable movies. It has an incredible cast, and we need to talk about the characters before we end this fucking review.
We do.
However, at the same time, he has been openly hostile towards Warner Brothers on the behalf of its HBO Max release. Sorry, Denis, for watching it at home. Unfortunately, the fucking train schedule didn't work out for me. And at the same time, they have been.
Would have wanted you to wait, Abram.
I know. He said it was like watching this movie at home is like fucking using a speedboat in a bathtub, which is just it's a whole different conversation to be had. But it is unfortunate. And if part 2 doesn't get made, I will be very, very disappointed.
Okay. Abram said it, and I'm gonna force the conversation into this avenue. And before we get into any other macro conversations, and I think it's fine that we save it till last, because Dune isn't exactly a character study in any sense. Like I said,
This movie is not.
This movie certainly isn't.
And the book is only sort of really. It's more plot based than character based. The characters are of course more fleshed out because they have 40 more hours to think about it, but
but let's start off with the man himself. Let's start off with Paul Atreides. I don't think Timothée Chalamet is very good. I understand that Paul Atreides has to, as a character, is mostly like this stoic figure who's, if we can use some Abram Dune terminology here, is sort of a Mary Sue in that things always sort of work out in his favor.
I coined that term, actually.
He did. Well, you used it most recently, in my mind. But yeah, things basically always work out in his favor. He's the chosen one. He has like 3 different prophecy names in Dune. And it's a thin line to walk, that stoicism line, but unfortunately, I think Timothy falls into sort of just stock standard action leading man delivery.
I think that you're kind of correct about his acting. I think Timothy Chalamet is not an action film actor, and
No.
I saw him in French Dispatch. I think his performance in French Dispatch is like really good. He's really, really good in that movie. He's way better than he is in Dune. I think where he succeeds though in Villeneuve's version is in his boyishness. He's very like not mature in the beginning of the film, and that like communicates that like replicates what I was thinking of his character as I read it in the book. And of course, when we get later and once he figures out a little bit more, I think then his like performance kind of doesn't follow through in his character's like knowledge of, oh, like, lol, I am the chosen one. Like I am kind of all powerful and like will lead it. I am going to lead some space jihad, to go cleanse the universe in a couple years.
Let's see if we can do this a second. He's the Kwisatz Haderach.
The Kwisatz Haderach.
He is Muad'Dib. He is Lisa Al Gaib. I think there's another one, maybe, potentially.
Well, he's also Paul Atreides,
He's also Paul Atreides. And
he's also Timothy Chalamet.
The Fremen call him... spoilers, the Fremen call him Usul. They give him a new name.
That's the short one that I remembered. Yeah. No, but I think it's really interesting when you apply Timothy Chalamet, who we know as an actor because he's the hot boy in Hollywood at the moment, and apply him to an epic movie, a movie with a lot of like dry tone to it, and I think he's bad in this movie. Yeah, it was close to a Sand reference, but it wasn't quite there yet. I really do think he's bad in this movie because I think he kind of just plays whiny white guy number 47, very clearly Timothy Chalamet plopped into the middle of this world. You're looking at actors like Oscar Isaac and Josh Brolin who are just in their roles, and they are stoic and they know exactly what's happening, and they visually fit the tone of their ruggedness. And of course, Paul is boyish. I wouldn't say I really feel too much of his boyishness through that. More the fact that he is a young white guy from America, and he's just kind of acting like a young white guy from America. And he really just does feel out of place to this. And not only that, but I do think that his line delivery is pretty bad in some places. Tanner and I were sitting there, and he was having like a really emotional conversation with his mother, and he just like delivers his lines like this. And then like when he's screaming, it's like there's no emotion there. And I lean over to him like, is Timothy Chalamet a good actor? And we're both like
he's good.
I really feel like he doesn't sell what I saw from Lynch's Dune, the stoicism, the importance, and the history of Paul Atreides. He just feels like Timothy Chalamet. With a shell of Paul Atreides over him.
He's a quirky boy actor. He's not a stoic boy actor. He's a quirky boy actor.
Here's what I want to say. I found this picture on Google Images of Timothy Chalamet. This picture, to me, describes his performance in Dune. I think that when Timothy Chalamet isn't speaking, he's really good in the role, which sounds like a humongous...
Sure. He does have some good looks. Like, he's just like, when he's looking, like, yeah, he got some good looks.
And that's like a royal boy.
It sounds like a humongous insult, but in actuality, it's really just a terribly backhanded compliment because the thing about it is I really like him in a lot of the movie. I think that he has a look to him, and he has an ability to, you might call it an inability, but in the context of Dune, an ability to reflect tone in his very flat face. So I think that physically he fits the role very well, and I do think that in moments of action, he does nicely, like when they're in the what are the dragonfly-looking planes called, Timo?
The ornithopters.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, all the T-named fellas.
I like when he's in there with his mother and they're in the storm and he has the vision and then he just lets go of the controls. He sells those sequences really well, I think.
Sure, yeah.
And in the action sequence at the end, when he's fighting to be with the Freemans, I think he sells that. But as soon as he starts talking, I just don't.
Morgan's one of them, by the way.
The Fremen.
It's the Fremen.
I apologize.
He's fighting Shamez, the Fremen.
So. But then he starts giving line delivery, and I just don't buy it. It's my same issue with Zendaya. I don't think Zendaya is very good. I mean, she's barely in the movie, but she's also not very good in the movie.
I feel bad for anyone who went into this movie as like a Zendaya fan because all of her stuff in the trailers is all of her scenes in the movie, essentially.
She is the Sephiroth of Dune.
Which is fair, based on the actual text, Shawnee
She
doesn't
would make
show
a
up.
very exciting Smash character. You're right.
Shawnee doesn't show up until like halfway through.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting what they chose to sell this movie on, which is those very few and far between and mostly future projected action sequences. Is the presence of Zendaya and Jason Momoa and the epic scale of everything, which of course is in the movie, but a lot of that is backgrounded. Like that's E-tier stuff that this movie is actually about, but they like cherry-picked and chose for the marketing of this film. Like, this is what it's about. Zendaya and worms and fucking battles and stuff. No. When going into the film, no, that's just not what's in the film.
I agree, but I do think that then when the battles and the worms do show up, unlike Zendaya, they're very satisfying.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah. But I have to say, I like all the other characters. I think they all give very good performances.
I think
I want to hear
yeah.
Timo, I want to hear your take on the leads, and then I want to talk about the rest of the cast, essentially.
Yeah, I'm mostly in the same boat, kind of in between Tanner and Abram. I think that Timothée Chalamet is good for like 85 to 90%, and I think he just bombs a couple of the lines. I don't think it's like a huge amount of the lines. I think they stick out that aren't like the best line. I think by and large he's good, and to me he fits how I imagined him to look from reading the book. And so that is as at least a little gratifying, you know. They always you always form a picture of a character when you're reading the book based off of the descriptions and how they act, and they always look different when they come out with the movie adaptation. It never looks the same. But I think that
Spider-Man, he's just a white guy.
Yeah, well, that's Spider-Man. So in Dune, I think that Timothée Chalamet's like performance and just his character, as well as the costumes that he wears, all like fit my vision of what Dune looks and feels like.
Yes, Kyle MacLachlan. That is Paul Atreides. That's hashtag my Paul Atreides. All right, that's my biggest problem with this movie. I felt Timothée Chalamet was just so underwhelming compared to Kyle MacLachlan, who just has this fucking mystical, stoic fucking energy.
It should be.
It should be.
That's not in the film, but
it's on the IMDb page.
It's not in the movie. Why is that on the IMDb page?
No, but I just think that when you look at what Kyle MacLachlan did with the role of Paul and the knowledge that he has behind him and the stoic nature and like weird Twin Peaksian, clearly, mysticism of that actor in this role, he really feels like he controls the world around him and could be the fucking fated gazillion years back prophesized child that will lead the universe. I do not believe Timothée Chalamet as the end all be all of generations of prophecy. I really do not feel him as that role.
Here's the thing. In the story, Paul does not feel himself like that for a long time, which makes an interesting point of contention that Paul has a large amount to grapple with, and we haven't seen the conclusion of his story. He really hasn't come into his like full being as the chosen one, and so that like that weariness and
RPG
questioning
character, boys.
If you want to think of it like that, he has yet to develop. Really, I think we're at this turning point in the plot, in the point where it splits. There's a lot more character development that comes. There's a lot more, there's stuff with his mom, and there's stuff with the Fremen, and that goes on and that develops his character really fully. Yeah, later on. And so I'm like hesitant to really like agree or disagree with that point, because just knowing what happens, being able to look back will inform my decision on how those aspects of the character come through in this film, seeing what happens in the possible next. Tanner, you really look like you wanted to say something right there.
Okay. This is going to be me transitioning into a lightning round of our quick thoughts on the rest of the characters.
Got it.
And I want to talk about Rebecca Ferguson as Lady Jessica, Paul's mother. Correct me if I'm wrong, Timo.
Mm-hmm.
But in the book, Lady Jessica is just like more assured of herself, especially in that first half. Like she's off her game a little bit, but she can like take care of herself, and she seems a bit more like confident than Rebecca Ferguson comes across in this film. I don't know if it's to blame her or the writers, but Rebecca Ferguson is like shaking and crying her way through 80% of scenes in this movie, and that just like hashtag not my lady Jessica. And then they do give her a shot at the end of the movie where she's like, oh, she's not happy about something, which is what Lady Jessica becomes in the book. She's not happy that Paul is getting the hots for Chani and stuff like that. So I don't know how they're gonna handle that, just like that sudden flip of her character in the second one, since that's what they're alluding to. But I just wasn't exactly happy with the portrayal of Lady Jessica. And Timo, I will allow you to respond to that, but then I want to do lightning round.
Okay, I don't really know how many thoughts I have about that because I wasn't really paying attention to it that much in the film, and I read the book over a year ago, and so that finer detail of how the character acts has escaped my memory a little bit. So we will. I think it's another example of wait and see, which is really it's just real crime kind of to come down to like the final determination of for me is this film good or is this film excellent? Is wait and see, which really sucks, but that's just kind of where it goes. Lightning round. I want to start it off. Oscar Isaac, I love him as the Duke. He's so good as the Duke.
Oh my God,
perfect casting. Perfect casting.
He has the stoicism. He has the royalness about him, and just
beard.
Like
if only I had that beard. If I had that beard, I would be complete. I would be a real man if I had that beard.
And like look weird with a big black beard. Not gonna lie.
And like the good-heartedness that Duke Leto is also supposed to kind of have. Like
the fatherliness.
There's the nuance to him that like he's still kind of like a bad guy because he's a monarch ruler, but like he's a good man in spite of that.
Yeah,
I think he's the one that benefits the most from the extended screen time. In Lynch's Dune, he's a C-tier character and he barely gets anything. And I was just like, yeah, you know, he was the Duke and now it's Paul's turn. But seeing Oscar Isaac in this, he's one of the few reasons that I do think that the extended runtime of this does work very well. Because I was very pleased with Oscar Isaac in the role. I think he's probably my favorite performance in the entire film because he does feel so at home in the visual dryness and those costumes that he's wearing, the delivery of his lines echoing across like a bunch of people and also being sort of like a connection point for everyone around him, because everyone else around him is kind of like butting heads with one another and they're a little bit angry and edgy all the time. He's just like, guys, calm the fuck down. We're gonna figure this out, and I really respect him for that.
Duke Leto is the uniting factor. That's why he's such a great leader. Abram, what did you think?
I think he's fantastic. I'm a huge Oscar Isaac fan. Star Wars, Ex Machina, Most Violent Year, I just think he's fantastic. I don't have much more to add.
Let's talk about Stellan Skarsgård a second. As the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. He's all right.
He's not in it a huge amount.
No, but he's all right.
I think he's pretty good. I think his like presence sells the idea of who the Baron is, and we don't get as grotesqueness from him in this version as you do in the Lynch version. He's really gross in the Lynch version, and it's a little
gross guy.
It's a little less so in this version, which I think is okay. It's just a choice in my mind. It could go either way. I love him floating around in that gigantic weird suit of his. I think it's you know, he's just like this kind of almost omnipresent. He's extremely powerful guy who's just doing his evil thing.
Tucker, before you jump in, I'm sorry. I do want to say, and this is maybe like an interpretation.
I was about to get really mad.
Okay. This is an interpretation thing from the book, but the Harkonnens in the book, from my understanding, are just supposed to be like bullheaded idiots that just happen to have a lot of money and power. And the Baron is just like an idiot who doesn't trust anybody, and like things just happen to work out for like he was supposed to die, and he narrowly avoided death from the poison tooth that Duke Leto had.
Badass espionage tool, by the way.
Like he is just an idiot who keeps getting away with things because he just muscles his way through them, and that didn't come across as well in this one.
I think he seems smarter in this one. I think it's an improvement on the character actually, because he seems like he knows what he's doing as opposed to the book where he's like a bit more bumbling.
No, I disagree, because I think what makes it good, what makes that dichotomy good between the Vladimir Harkonnen and Duke Leto is smart and maybe doesn't have as much power, but he knows how to command his people better. Whereas Vladimir Harkonnen has a bunch of meathead soldiers and lots of money and power, and he just like, I'm gonna do what I want all the time. That's that sort of dichotomy. But Tucker, I'm sorry, I can go to you.
It's okay. I think my problem with everything about the Baron with this movie is not Stellan Skarsgård's fault. It's funny hearing his voice echo from this fucking gross, partly CGI, partly fucking practical effect, big motherfucker. But he does fine in the role. But I do think that the portrayal of the Baron in this, and of course, I can only compare it to Lynch's version, is very underwhelming because he just doesn't feel intimidating. Like, he doesn't have a presence. He shows up a handful of times, and when you see him, he's just a couple of lines and then he's out of there. He doesn't feel like a force that they have to go against. The actual Harkonnens attacking and them sending the bombs down, that feels intimidating. But when you go back to the leader and just see him do a couple of things and then get a burp in his face, like, he just doesn't feel like the evil presence that I wish he would, because that does mean that the film is lacking that sort of darker weight on top of it, which is, again, the lack of politics that I feel like this film should have dived more into. I didn't feel like there was a huge rush for the House Atreides to get spice mining because, okay, the Harkonnens are on our ass, or the Harkonnens are going to do this, do that. They were guys kind of there in the background, and if, for me, being familiar with who they were in Lynch's version, I knew that they were a force, but this film did not have that come across, especially from the Baron.
I mean, as a newcomer, I think it certainly did to me. I think it's a difference of interpretation based on what you wanted out of the way that's telling its story. But I think his levitation, just kind of moving about and burping and being gross, is really effective for me. I think that communicated a lot. Grabbing the medic by the hair, picking him up, cutting his throat, like it sold to me that he is a commanding presence. But what I really liked about him is that he enabled Denis Villeneuve to do another man coming out of a bag or puddle of goo scene.
Yeah.
God damn it.
A few more quick things. I love Josh Brolin as Guernie Hallick.
Yep.
Yes.
I think that Thufir Hawat and Liet Kynes, like I said, are a bit underserved.
They're not in it enough. Liet Kynes
they're
not in it enough. Thufir,
No.
I don't know if he has too much of an impact. I think Thufir is fine. I do want more of Liet Kynes, but she dies. Also,
Yes.
totally awesome that she's played by a black woman. Totally fits the thematic ideas of the story. And if you complain about that, I'm gonna call you out for what you are.
The role that Liet Kynes serves is not dependent on the character's gender in the slightest. So shut the fuck up if you're being a whiny baby about it.
I haven't heard anyone mention that, but
No,
she was
me neither.
in it.
I did when casting was announced, but people kind of shut it down, I think. So.
But in any case, that's all I have to say about the rest of the characters. I'm interested to see
Jason
who
Momoa.
they get.
Jason Momoa.
Duncan Idaho, good.
Yeah.
I wish my name was Duncan Idaho.
I do think that the action.
You wish your name was Duncan Idaho? Duncan Idaho is the dumbest fucking name for a spacefaring war character I ever heard in my goddamn life. He literally sounds like a potato from every possible angle.
I also think the action choreography is just fine. And one more thing, I'm very interested to see who they cast as Fade Routha. Who's like the antithesis to Paul.
Yeah, Fade Routha. Can Villeneuve just do it and cast Sting? Can Sting just be Fade Routha again?
Sting comes back.
That would be hilarious. Oh my god.
I think he's like the same age as Stellan Skarsgård, so that wouldn't really work.
Okay,
because
maybe
he's his nephew.
Maybe we don't cast Sting as Fade Routha.
Can I just say quickly?
Yeah.
Javier Bardem, as usual, is fantastic.
Oh yes, I forgot about him.
I thought his performance was terrific.
Underserved, but when he shows up, he definitely has that presence, that knowledge and that drive. Like, I've dealt with this shit before. Like, I actually think he was one of the more interesting presences and a very good foil to Duke Leto.
Okay. Final thoughts.
Final thought. Duncan Idaho, Jason Momoa without a beard. That's the first time I've ever seen that. That was a little bit unsettling at first, but he's good in the role. I have nothing against him.
Yeah,
but just like seeing him without fucking facial hair was like, oh, that's not right. I'm not supposed to see that.
I think it was a good casting and a good a moment for Momoa as an actor where he gets to both do his action thing, be a muscular badass, but also have like a character and have a little connection, because he is far more fleshed out than any of the other Atreides sidekicks are, and he doesn't die, so he's like hanging out, and he will continue in the film in the next edition, in the next part of Dune.
Well, technically that's a spoiler, Because it very much appears that he dies in this film.
It does? Well, maybe I remembered it incorrectly then. He could be dead. I think he is dead.
No,
I think you're right. I'm
very
wrong.
clearly is killed.
He's dead. He's dead. That was wrong of me. I don't know why I said that.
Yeah, Timo, I made the same mistake. Don't worry. I misremembered maybe or maybe
Guernie.
not a certain survivor. Okay. we'll bleep it. I don't know, or we won't. Whatever. But I do want to give my final summary thoughts. I know we have to wrap up very quickly, but
All right, final thoughts, speed run. Let's go.
I thought Dune was a great cinematic experience that maybe isn't the perfect adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune, although this maybe cements in my mind that can't really happen. It lacks what I personally liked from Dune, but also adds something that weren't present in the book, like that scale and like that cinematography and the sound design. I really hope it succeeds because I think that this is the type of movie that I want to see more of and maybe done better in the future. I think there's enough material in this universe for a creator to come along and do it the way that I personally would love to see Dune be done. Okay.
Tucker,
okay, I'll go next.
Or Abram.
No,
go next.
Tucker, okay, no, I'll go next. I mean, I love the movie. I think that it made me curious and in terms of the lore, I think it is a visually and sonically arresting film. I think it really forced me to be an active viewer in the sparseness of it all. I think its beauty and its desolation are really unmatched. I truly love the movie, and I think that there's a direct correlation between your IQ and the score you give Dune.
Oh no!
Just kidding.
No!
Just kidding. But no, I really personally loved it, in spite of what I think is a equally understandable reading that it was just too empty.
Tucker, your thought?
My Dune was ruined for me. Villeneuve's Dune was ruined for me because Lynch's Dune, I not having read the book, feel captures the mysticism and depth and detail of what I see the world of Dune to be, and this film really just lacks that. It has the scope that Lynch's doesn't. It has the epicness and the butt-shaking soundiness that very few films have. But when you get to this film on a character level, on a pacing level, on a story level, it's very lacking. It's empty. The characters are, for the most part, mediocrely portrayed, which leaves you very disconnected from the events of the film. And I'm interested to see more because I do think that the actual interesting parts of the character development and the world building could be done in that second movie. But again, that's all hypothetical. And because it's lacking that, I feel like there could have been a better balance. And that makes this film pretty weak in my eyes. It is a well-made film. Nothing on the technical side is lacking. Although I do think sometimes the sound mixing was a little bit too heavily leaned into the instead of the dialogue. But I'm disappointed. I'm underwhelmed, and I'd like to see this again because I think there could be more for me to pick up from it. But it's not the greatest story ever told that it was marketed as. I literally got a YouTube ad of Timothée Chalamet saying Dune is the greatest story ever told. And not only was that pretentious and obnoxious, but this film did not deliver that, and I'm very, very sad about it.
Well, I think that this film is very good. I think that it does an adaptation of Dune in a quite good manner. I think, Tucker, that you are correct that Lynch's Dune kind of ruined it for you. I think had you watched it in a different order, you could have a totally different opinion about what's happening in this film. Because I think Lynch's Dune takes serious missteps with the narrative of Frank Herbert's novel that Villeneuve somewhat corrects. I think that that Villeneuve does a better job taking the story and making it into something that is watchable. I think if you don't know what's going on with Dune, Lynch's Dune is quite close to just a clusterfuck that is unwatchable. But
I put this on my favorite movies of all time list.
Well, there you go.
Go see Dune. Go see it in the theater if you can, preferably. Yeah. But if you can't,
I still think it's right at home.
If you can't, take a picture of yourself flipping off the camera and send it to Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah,
and then also install some sort of vibrator in your seat so you can experience the.
Yeah.
My final point, I said it earlier, but I think that the true score of this movie will be revealed when the second one comes out, when we get to see everything that really happens, which is an unfortunate situation to be as movie lovers because I want to watch it now. But I'm gonna have faith that it will come out and that Warner Brothers will do the right thing and pay for it because they really should. They really should. Yeah. I think it would be really fun to see everything play out, and a real disservice to not only Villeneuve and his idea for the property, but to the actual property itself, to just kind of let it have this weird half of it being told and not telling the other half. So there you go. That's
we'll gather around these chairs in 4 years to review Dune Part 2.
Absolutely.
If
I think we went for a good portion of Dune's runtime talking about Dune. So thank you for sitting through all of that. And again,
welcome.
Let us know your thoughts in the comments and join the Discord.
Do it.